Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. Maybe, Michael, you can unmute everyone's mics and while people are joining.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. While people are joining us, we can maybe take a few minutes.
That looks like thousand like.
I see some names and faces that I recognize, and some that I don't. I'm going to just kind of I think until until all these participants come in, I think I'll just kind of hold off.
How do we mute and unmute?
How do you what?
How do we mute and unmute ourselves?
I think that down on the, I think every computer is different, but on mine it's in the bottom left of your screen. Also, we can mute and unmute from here if you are having a hard time getting that.
You'll want to unmute. I mean, you'll want to mute all participants except when they need to speak.
Yeah, we'll do that. We've learned that through some unfortunate lessons. All right, well, it's 3:03, and I suppose that we ought to get started. I am absolutely amazed at the ability that we all have to gather together in our own homes or businesses or wherever we find ourselves and have these kind of conversations. I'm you know, I wonder what my grandpa and what our grandparents would have thought about this kind of
technology. Or do you want to just turn it on?
I know that
I can run them.
my 90-year-old father is handling it okay, but it's pretty remarkable that we can do this. Maybe rather than just trying to unmute everyone's microphones, maybe you can type in the chat line there to everyone where you're calling in from. I'd like to just get some understanding as to where everyone is. We've got Greg in Riverton, Cody and Juab. We've got Cedar City, Bountiful, Sandy, West Jordan, Linden, Layton, Highland, Orem, Mill Creek, Tremonton, Layton, Orem, Tooele, Sandy, Layton, Bountiful, Bluffdale, Harriman, Hooper. This is remarkable. Ogden. Okay, I'm going to start. Maybe we'll have a few more join us. We've got 57 in here now. I'd say that's a nice bunch, and I don't want to keep you all waiting. I'd like to start. I'd like to start, if I can, with introducing myself and just kind of tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm David Leavitt, and I'm the candidate for Utah Attorney General. I'm the Utah County Attorney currently, and I have to say, I know what I'm talking about when I say that our criminal justice system is in the mud, muck, and mire that comes from years of gradual decline, and that our liberties are in real peril. I'm running because we must reform our criminal justice system. If it weren't so, I simply wouldn't seek this office. Our founders gave us a constitution, a legislative branch to make laws, an executive branch to enforce them, a judicial branch to be the referee of the other two. But the most significant power, the founders never gave government. The founders never gave government the power to decide guilt or innocence of a fellow citizen. They never gave government the power to take away a fellow citizen's liberty. They kept that power to themselves, the people, in the form of a jury trial. John Adams said that representative government and trial by jury are the heart and lungs of liberty, that without them we have no other fortification against being ridden like horses, worked like cattle, and fed and clothed like swine and hounds. Founder John Dickinson implored that it is the duty of every man and woman to maintain to the utmost the jury trial, to restore it to its ancient dignity, if it's at all impaired, and above all to guard it with the most jealous circumspection. That right, the jury trial, is on the verge of extinction as we have relegated it, frankly, to the dusty shelves of history. Today, 99% of every criminal case receives no jury trial. Instead, prosecutors give plea bargains in exchange for guilty pleas. And what that really means is that 99 times out of 100, the government never has to prove the allegations that it makes. And when the government doesn't have to prove that, what ultimately will stop the government from doing that to you? And I know that there are some on this call that have had that experience and have had that happen to you. We cannot afford to trade our liberty for efficiency. To do so is to barter our birthright for a hollow promise of order, which we'll never ultimately have anyway. For as Thomas Jefferson said, he said, the person who is willing to sacrifice his liberty in exchange for security or order will soon find that he has neither. We're implementing these kinds of changes in Utah County, and we're seeing much success. And if I'm able to be the Attorney General, I'd like to change it for Utah. I'd like to protect the heart and lungs of our liberty all across this state. That's what the Attorney General should be doing. The Attorney General's office should be focused on Utah's issues. And I got to say to you that I love this convention process. I love the fact that, and I've just recently, as I've been going through delegate meeting after delegate meeting after delegate meeting, I've come to understand that it's this convention process. It's a process through which we show our gratitude for our liberties by carefully vetting and weighing candidates and issues. It's not a high school popularity contest. People in this setting are not swayed by fluffy endorsements from people who really know nothing about the criminal justice system. And ultimately, it's your endorsement that I seek, the endorsement of the delegates, because you are the ones engaged in this process and demonstrating that you're doing what you can do to protect our liberties. As a rural elected county attorney, I fought the federal government for over 8 years, to gain access to our public lands. That's a fight that I'll lead as Attorney General, because Utahns in Utah should have more to say about what goes on in Utah than a bureaucrat does in Washington. And as legal advisor to every state agency, I will ensure that chief among the advice that my office gives is that government exists to serve its citizens, not to build a bigger and more elaborate governmental empire. And, I know firsthand that we will never prosecute nor incarcerate our way out of our opioid problem. I know firsthand that we need to find different solutions to the wash, rinse, and repeat cycle of jailing nonviolent offenders. Because we need to understand that everyone we prosecute is someone's mother and father, son or daughter, And I will focus on building a criminal justice system that gives them an opportunity for a hand upward towards productivity and sobriety. But at the same time, we also need to find solutions for those for whom we must jail. Because there are people who are dangerous, there are people who hurt us, and they are people from whom we need to have protection. But we need to separate, in the words of a man named Pat Nolan, who I hope that many of you will have a chance to listen to, we need to distinguish between those who are dangerous to us and those on the one hand, and those on the other hand who simply make us mad and disappointed. Because we need to find a solution for both. The people we have to put in jail, we need to make sure that they productively return to society so that they can say when they come back and live among us that they truly are better off because they participated in the criminal justice system. Today, that simply wouldn't be possible because today people don't generally come out of the criminal justice system as better, more substantive and healed people. If I'm elected Attorney General, I'll also recognize the humanity and the hurt of every victim of crime and do my best to build a system that will help victims heal. But together we can do this, and together we can redeem our criminal justice system. And if I'm fortunate enough to get your vote and your support, I can lead this effort as Attorney General, but I can't do it without your help. And so I am crisscrossing the state virtually, trying to get as many in front of as many delegate screens as I possibly can, so that I can spread this message that we are in danger of losing so much if we don't just simply stand up and try and change our process. Now, I have a number of questions that have come in, it looks to me like. I'm going to start answering questions spontaneously, and then in a few minutes after I've answered your questions, I'm going to tell you, the two pieces of exciting news that I think is exciting. But Kent says this: the Utah Attorney General's office has less prosecutors than the Utah County Attorney's office. Most of the attorneys at the AG's office are civil attorneys. The prosecutors at the AG's office handle a fractional amount of the criminal cases as compared to the Utah County Attorney's office. That's true. Question: isn't it backwards for you to seek office as the Utah Attorney General when you'll have less of an impact on criminal cases? Follow up: you don't take direction from the current Attorney General, so why would you be able to control the local prosecutors if you were Utah Attorney General? Kent, those are both great questions, and it seems to me, based on the on the depth of your question, that you have some familiarity with this issue. And I'm going to start by answering that question in reverse order, if I can, with your follow-up and then your question. I've served as I've served as an elected county attorney under 3 attorneys general: Jan Graham, Mark Shurtleff, and now Sean Reyes. When I was the Juab County attorney under Jan Graham and Mark Shurtleff, they had my back. If I needed resources as a small town or as a small county attorney, they'd help me. It was very much a collegial relationship where I was a phone call away from the Attorney General. And I respected that relationship because I inherently understood the code section in the statute that says the following. The Utah Code says that the Attorney General shall have supervisory powers over all county and district's attorney with respect of all of their duties that relate to prosecuting crime. And so that, Kent, is really how I'd like to start with your first question, and that is, statutorily speaking, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement official of the state of Utah, And statutorily speaking, the Attorney General has supervisory, not only rights, but supervisory obligations to ensure that what happens in Weber County is somewhat similar, at least, to what's going on in Washington County or in Wayne County. And so just because the current Attorney General has chosen not to accept that obligation and exercise supervisory powers over county attorneys doesn't mean that if I were Attorney General that I wouldn't do it differently. I would do it much differently. And I wouldn't come in on day one and say, okay, guys, I'm your boss. I'm not their boss. They're elected, I'm elected. But what it does mean is that it imbues, it places a duty on me to supervise and a duty on them to be supervised. And that's one way in which we rein in this unfettered prosecutorial power, is to actually have someone that looks over them and supervises them as state law requires. And so you create a relationship with your county attorneys. And I think the very first day of office, I would start visiting county attorneys personally in their offices to create a relationship so that they knew that I was there for them. And then we would circle around together, and together we would decide the standards that should occur in the state of Utah. As it stands now, there are 29 separate criminal justice systems in the state of Utah because the Attorney General does not supervise or exercise any kind of direction or relationship with county attorneys. Like I have said in the past, by everyone's account, Sean Reyes is a decent and a good lawyer. I had the privilege of meeting him once. I met him 4 years ago when he was speaking at a public function in Utah County. I got to shake his hand. The problem with that is that I'm the elected prosecutor in Utah's second largest county, and I've never even had an opportunity to have a telephone call with the guy with respect to my job. I've tried, can't do it. And so I'm saying, to your follow-up question, that the role of the attorney generals is to be involved in the professional lives of the county attorneys. Now, your first question is this. The Utah Attorney General's office has fewer prosecutors than the Utah County Attorney's office. That's true. I have 50 lawyers. Not all of them are criminal lawyers. Roughly 40 of them are criminal lawyers in one capacity or another. And then you say, isn't it backwards for you to seek office as the Utah Attorney General when you have more prosecutors in the Utah County Attorney's office? Well, Kent, for me, the point isn't how many. To me, the point isn't how many prosecutors you have in your office. The point is, what do you do from a leadership perspective as the head of the office? As a Utah County Attorney, I'm the chief law enforcement official in Utah County. As the Utah Attorney General, I would be the chief law enforcement official for the state of Utah. And that gives me a podium upon which to speak to every prosecutor in this state, not just in my office, but also in all the other 28 other offices. And what do you talk about? Well, I'll tell you that the thing that needs the most reform in our criminal justice system is to understand how to change the perspective of our good prosecutors. Our prosecutors are people who, by far and away want to do the right thing, but they have grown up in a system that has forgotten what the true purpose of the system is. And so my role as the Attorney General is to help change the perspective of prosecutors all around the state. The other thing is this, and that is I would retool the Utah Attorney General's office. I would place the most experienced trial attorneys and the most experienced criminal lawyers that I could persuade to work at the Attorney General's office, and I would shift prosecution duties away from the Attorney General and begin to be a resource to county attorneys rather than a competing prosecutor to county attorneys, because right now the same case can be prosecuted at either level. So those are some of the organizational things I do. Kent, I hope that that answers your question, and please feel free to ask a follow-up if you'd like. Todd Weiler says, and parenthetically, before I get to Senator Weiler's question, I'll say that we're at 96 participants. I'm thrilled for the interest that we have this afternoon for 3 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. I think this is great news, and I'm so grateful to be able to speak to so many of you at one time. Senator Weiler says, I was surprised to learn a few years ago that 97% of the inmates at the point of the mountain will eventually be released back into the community. You know, Senator Weiler, that's what we need to understand. Number one, there's several things that we need to understand from that. And people generally are surprised when they learn this. The first is that about 85 or 90% of the people that are in our prisons and our jails are not violent people. These are people who have done stupid things, they've done dumb things, they have addictions, and they have found themselves in a system that puts them in prison. And I'll tell you, it doesn't really matter what they look like when they come in. When they come out, I can almost guarantee you, and while it's not true for every one of them, but nearly every one of them will come back worse off than they were when they went in. And that's why we need to understand that everyone that goes to the point of the mountain, let me back off that statement. Nearly every one of them that goes to the point of the mountain at some point is going to come back and live with us in our community. The question is, the question is, will they come back better as a result? Today, the answer to that question is no. We have got to get, we protect our community less when we send someone to prison for 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, send them to criminality school, and then they come back truly hardened. That's not something to me that makes sense. Catherine says, I'd like to hear your big announcements first before taking questions. Well, too late. I guess I already took 2 questions, but I'll stop and I'll make the announcements if that's okay. The first is this, and now, you may disagree on how big these announcements are. To me, they're big because they give us an opportunity to see 2 very important things. One being an issue in this race, and the other one being to see candidates in this race. Tomorrow night, you may have known or understood that President Trump recently pardoned 11 or 12 individuals for various crimes. One of them was a man named Bernard or Bernie Kerik, who was the New York City Police Commissioner for a number of years, who was also the head of all of New York's correctional facilities, including Rikers Island, the nation's among the most nation's violent prisons. And then he had, made some bad choices, had a brush with the law on the other side, was prosecuted, spent 3 years and 11 days in federal prison. Well, President Trump recently pardoned him, and another man is a name who is a less well-known name. If you are familiar, if you watch Fox News very much, you undoubtedly will have run into the name of Bernie Kerik, the former New York Police Commissioner. I'd encourage you to Google him, read about him. The other name is Pat Nolan. Pat Nolan's a former California state legislator who also got caught up on the wrong side of the law in a bribery scandal in the state of California, and he too was prosecuted and went to prison. And when he got out of prison, he and Commissioner Kerik became so outspoken for the need for criminal justice reform. And you got to understand, Bernie Kerik is a hardcore policeman. He is a law and order kind of guy. And when he came out of prison, his goal in life became to reform the criminal justice system. Well, these two men were both pardoned recently by President Donald Trump. And Pat Nolan created, many of you will have heard of CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee in Washington, D.C. The CPAC has an arm called dealing with criminal justice reform, because criminal justice reform is a very serious conservative issue. In fact, it's one of President Trump's hot button issues for this election. Pat Nolan created the Pat Nolan Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Well, Pat Nolan and Bernie Kerik and former U.S. Attorney Brett Tolman will join. This is announcement number one. Will join me tomorrow night at my 7 o'clock town hall, so that we can, number one, hear their backstory about how President Trump went about picking them out of the 1 in a million that could have been pardoned and chose each of them for a pardon. You'll hear their story. You'll hear about how they got into prison. You'll hear how they got changed. And then you'll hear not only their backstory about how they were pardoned by President Trump, and I think that one or both of you will actually tell you about the telephone conversation that they had with President Trump. But we'll spend an hour together, the four of us: Brett Tolman, the former U.S. Attorney for the state of Utah; Pat Nolan, who's been one of Trump's pardonees; and Commissioner Bernie Kerik, the former New York Police Commissioner. The four of us will be discussing criminal justice reform, prison reform, and most specifically, what do we do about the question of giving people second chances once they've become convicted of a crime? Because in our society, so many people, once they're convicted of a crime, their trajectories in life, level out and go down because people are scared to hire them. People won't rent to them, and these are real substantive people who are going to talk about this problem, not only what it looks like nationally, but why it's so necessary here in Utah. And the fact that I have a former U.S. attorney, a former New York Police Commissioner, and the creator of CPAC's criminal justice reform efforts, the fact that they're willing to appear with me in my town hall is a matter of tremendous gratitude and satisfaction. So that's announcement number one, is that I would encourage you all to tune in tomorrow night at 7 to listen to this. I promise you it will be one of the most engaging, enlightening conversations on criminal justice reform that you will have ever heard. And you're going to have an opportunity to listen to their whole pardon story. The next announcement is also related to this race, and that is, I have felt, and I'm sure it's a matter of coronavirus and everyone's self-isolating, I have felt that it's been a real shame that none of the delegates are able to see the candidates side by side, that there isn't some forum where John Swollow, David Leavitt, and Sean Reyes can all be either, if not in the same room, in the same virtual space, and have a conversation together on these issues. And so I came up with the idea, as we were talking about how best can we help people distinguish between these candidates. We came up to, it wasn't my idea, someone on my team came up with the idea that said, why don't we just have an unmoderated conversation with the candidates, where we put all three candidates together, and I let those two candidates ask me questions. They let me ask them questions, and it's, it gives you a hands-on opportunity to see for yourself which candidate you prefer. And And so I extended that invitation to John Swollow to have an unmoderated conversation with the candidates, and he gratefully accepted. And when I sent the email out, I had hoped to have heard from Sean Reyes, our Attorney General, because I extended the same invitation to him. And just as one of the reasons you may have noticed that I looked down at my phone as we started, because at 3:03 today, when we were just starting, what I said was to Sean Reyes, I said, I've invited John Swollow to have an hour conversation with the candidates over Zoom this Wednesday. And he's consented to it, and I'm extending the same invitation to you. It's an unmoderated discussion between the three of us. If you're able to join us, I'm happy to discuss the format prior. Let me know if that's something that you're willing to do. Thank you. He texted me back today at 3 o'clock or 3:03 and said, hope you're feeling better, David. Thank you for the offer, but I will respectfully decline. Good luck to the both of you. So when I sent out the announcement, I had hoped that I'd have all three candidates on the same screen, but for reasons that I'm not fully aware of, or not at all aware of, I'm not sure why Attorney General Reyes has decided not to join us. And so Wednesday won't be quite as enlightening, because we'll only have two of the three candidates, but I hope that you'll join us on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, the day before voting starts, and then you can get at least a perspective on two of the three candidates. All right. So, Catherine, those were the announcements, and I hope that you'll still continue to stay here. And but I'm going to move on to the questions. Richard Curtis asks, you talk about fighting unfair attacks by the legal system. That is kind of what John Swollow is saying, and why he should be elected now. Your thoughts? By the way, I'm glad you're feeling better. Thank you. Me too. Last time we talked, I asked you about reforming the justice system, and you educated me. Thank you. I'm certainly leaning towards you. Thank you, Richard, very much. You know, John Swollow has experienced something that I never have experienced, and that is being a defendant and having the full weight of the government come down bearing upon you. Now, I've had that experience when my client had that, and that's an unpleasant experience. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for John Swollow to go through that experience. And that is what he's coming back and saying, essentially, prosecutors have too much power. And he's right. Prosecutors do have too much power. The founders never intended to put a system where the ability to investigate, the ability to charge, the ability to determine a plea bargain, and complete immunity were all vested in one person. And the problem there isn't simply with prosecutorial power. The problem is with the lack of a jury trial, and that's the remedy. And so, you know, I wholeheartedly agree with many of the things that John Swollow says. I limit it to many because, quite frankly, I haven't heard everything he says. But moving on, Bonnie says, I like the idea of more jury trials, but how would we pay for them without increasing expenses to the taxpayer? We would need more judges, court staff, public defenders, and compensation for jury members for taking off work. Well, first off, let me make a statement, Bonnie, that I'm certain that you, well, I'm not certain, I really believe that you'll believe in, and that is, you've identified potential problems here, but I think that you'll agree that we can't let those potential problems get in the way of saving what John Adams says is, you know, the heart or lungs of our liberty, and having more jury trials. Let me tell you what I'm doing in Utah County. Number one, I'm telling my prosecutors, don't charge someone with an eye towards a plea bargain. if you charge someone with an eye towards a plea bargain, understanding that you're going to drop the charges, you're naturally going to charge more than you would have than if you understood that you have to prove a case within in a 2-day jury trial or a 3-day jury trial, generally speaking. And so we have started out by changing the charging structure so that we are more prepared to try the case rather than to settle the case. The other thing that I have done is that I've created a stream, if you will, and I had to have the Utah legislature's help for this. I've created a stream whereby we can divert low-risk cases out of the district court and over to the justice court so that we can depopulate the district court caseload so that we can have more jury trials, because the answer to this problem is not more money. The answer to this problem is not more court staff. The answer to this is taking what we've got and shifting it so that it's more efficient. And I'll also tell you that if it does cost more money, if we come up with a different alternative to nonviolent offenders, then we don't have to spend as much money incarcerating them. We can find more money for treatment and for things that will reduce the criminal justice system. Because I'll tell you that if you make the assumption that crime is going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, we're eventually just predicting our own demise. We have to recognize that it can only be acceptable to us to find a way to decrease crime, and that's what we're trying to do here in Utah County. Brad says, I'm here to hear the big announcement. Or was it just a deceptive hype to get us here? You know, I think that would be fairly short-sighted of me to give you a deceptive hype, because that would be one sure way to lose your vote, I suppose. No, to me, it's big news. Being able to get on camera with me, Bernie Carrick, and also Pat Nolan, two people who President Trump pardoned, hearing their story, hearing their perspective with regard to the criminal justice system. I think that that's important. And the other big news is we're having our conversation with the candidates on Wednesday. Unfortunately, Sean Reyes has decided not to join us, but the other two of us will be there. All right. John asks, how can you change the experience of inmates in prison for crime? Your goal is laudable, but can you actually effectuate it? Well, John, I'm not going to be able to do it alone. It's going to have to take all of us. And we have to assume a few things. Number one, we have to begin to assume that maybe we're not doing this the best compared to everybody else in the world. Maybe we need to look to other models for how other people are doing this and handling it, because there's a lot of countries in Europe, there's a lot of countries around the world, free nations, who have a much more effective criminal justice system in reducing recidivism. And I will tell you that I strongly believe in diverting nonviolent offenders from jail to alternative programs. In Utah County, we have this great program called run by the Utah County Sheriff's Office called the Utah County Alternative Probation, and they have great success at helping them through it rather than by putting them in jail. But to give you just a couple of improving the inmate experience. Well, number one, you have to start by reducing the inmates. You have to start by saying nonviolent people we need to find a different solution for them. Now, if you're a murderer, a rapist, a burglar, a robber, someone that's completely engaged in that kind of violent crime, then the answer is you have to go to prison. Because there's a role for prison and for jail. At that point, we have to recognize that it's our responsibility not to simply warehouse them. It's our responsibility to find specific programs for them. It's our responsibility to help find ways for them to integrate into society. And like I say, as Attorney General, I can lead that discussion, but my guess is that truly the best ideas will come from those who actually who are the boots on the ground running the system. And if I'm the Attorney General, I'm going to be looking for everybody's ideas. Okay, another Randy asked for the questions. I think I've done that. It's good to have a goal and objective. We have to start somewhere, and it's important to understand. We're not going to solve it. It's taken us 150 years to get to where we are with our criminal justice system and our lack of jury trials. It's going to take us a lot long. It's going to take us a lot longer than I'm going to be around, both professionally and on this earth, before we get back to where we need to be. But the critical thing is to turn this around so we're going in the right direction. The code only, Mark says, the code only gives a little authority. It's good that Sean Reyes trusts you. I'm not sure, frankly, that Sean Reyes knows enough about me to trust me. To be honest with you, my experience with Sean, with other county attorneys, is that no one ever hears from Sean Reyes. I don't think it's an issue of trust. I think it's an interest that it's a question he's just focusing on other things. And then Mark goes and quotes the statute that the duty is to exercise supervisory power over district and county attorneys of the state in all matters pertaining to their duties and offices. Thank you. Mark says, well, basically the AG can ask for reports. That's not quite true. The AG can ask for reports. The statute simply says including the authority to. But the operative language in that statute is in subparagraph 6 when it says in all matters pertaining to the duties of their offices, and that's one that I believe we need to look for. All right, Mark Edwards, have you heard of SWAP? They collaborate all the time, right? SWAP is the statewide association of public attorneys or prosecutors. I know very well about SWAP. I used to sit on I sat on their board for a number of years when I was a Judd County attorney. I sit on their board now. I will tell you by personal experience that it is a very different experience to sit in a SWAP meeting with city attorneys and deputy attorneys. It's a very different thing altogether to be nose to nose and face to face with the elected official who, whether a county attorney or an attorney general, has the ultimate authority and duty to do that. So yeah, I mean, I've heard of SWAP, but it's basically a lobbying organization to get laws changed or to oppose legislation. It's very little more than that. It's a good organization, but it certainly can't replace what the Attorney General is supposed to do. Okay. Kent, comment to the answer to my prior question. Your response seems against local control principles. I understand your rationale, even if I don't agree with your desire to direct local prosecutors from state office. I was wrong by your answer. The Utah County Attorney's Office has a similar number of prosecutors, but the volume of cases is much larger in Utah County. You can have a voice and impact with all of the prosecutors through the Utah Prosecution Council and SWAP. You're very right. And it's not my intention to try and take away local control. I'm a huge proponent of local control, but I will say that if you're a citizen, we need to remember that this isn't about the Attorney General, and this isn't about the county attorneys. This is about representing the citizens of the state of Utah. And if I'm a resident of Salt Lake County, I should expect to have similar treatment in Salt Lake County than if I go down to Washington County or Davis County or Weber County. And this question illustrates so much of the problem, and that is people are generally speaking about protecting their own turf. This isn't about turf. This is about people. This is about representing people. And we need to get off any notion that we're going to, that someone's not going to take instruction or supervision or whatever, because this isn't about our little fiefdoms. This is about representing the citizens of the state of Utah to the best of our ability and giving them the very best that we can. Spencer, good to see you again. I understand the need to treat those struggling with addiction rather than just incarcerate them. I know that professionally and because addiction has hit my family. I also understand that drug crimes are generally nonviolent crimes, but how do you balance the need for treatment with the need to protect the public from those who struggle with addiction and choose to victimize others by stealing from them and burglarizing them and threatening them or assaulting them or killing them? I understand that those are violent. I understand that those are violent crimes and that you believe in prosecuting them, but what about those who may not have committed a violent crime yet, but who, if their addiction gets bad enough, will eventually commit other crimes to support their habit? That's a real, Spencer, that's a great question. It's a troubling balancing act, because at some point let's start with the obvious question. If you're a drug addict and you do something to hurt someone, you get prosecuted for the drugs and for the violence, and you go to jail. But once we start looking at people's habits and saying, you're at threat to hurt us in the future, so we're going to incarcerate you, that starts to sound a lot like a Minority Report. And that's the sort of thing from which we have to guard against. It was Benjamin Franklin that said, if you will trade your liberty for security, you'll soon find that you have neither. And so, the government simply is not going to protect everyone from every act, because it's not the role of government. But we do have to be fastidious. We do have to do our very best. But if you are a drug addict and you commit a burglary or a robbery or a sexual assault or whatever, we prosecute you for both. And unfortunately, you're going to have to go to jail because you have demonstrated that you're not safe to be among us. Okay, Greg says, due to coronavirus, government seems to be taking rights away from people by saying it's what's for us. They're using our desire to be good citizens and to do good as a way to restrain our liberties. How would you handle the infringement of our constitutional rights through government overreach and soft tyranny? That's a great question, Greg. I have to say that I think it's important for government to encourage us to socially distance. I think it's important for government to be the cheerleader for us to stay safe. But at the end of the day, we can't substitute a little liberty for a little security, because it's just, that's not the role of government. We have to understand that ultimately our protector is not going to be government. Ultimately, our protector is going to be, number one, our reliance on our own self and helping our neighbors, and also our reliance on the supreme being. From whatever religion you hail, from whatever religion you hail, we have to understand that government is not the supreme authority, and so we don't need to give all of that power to government. All right. Amy says, I've spoken with many convicted felons. They believe they are not allowed to vote in Utah. Some are scared to vote. Can you talk about this? I actually think that convicted felons have, by statute, do not have the right to vote. Can someone correct me if I'm wrong on that? I think that I don't think that they have the right to vote, but someone can correct me, and maybe someone can Google that, and we can get an answer to you before we get out here. Mike Coyle accurately points out Rikers Island isn't a prison, it's a jail. Mike, and I know that you're well aware of the distinction between jail and prison. I commingle the terms, frankly, because most people don't aren't involved in it day to day, will view incarceration as prison or jail, and so but I appreciate you making that distinction. And you're right, it is a very important distinction. Let me read a little bit to you about that Sherry put about Bernie Carrick, who's going to join us tomorrow. One of the most dynamic, undisputed, controversial, and accomplished leaders in law enforcement, correction, and national security in the United States. His unparalleled achievements as New York City's police commissioner and correction commissioner, and his 30-year career in the criminal justice field, coupled with his later incarceration, which included time in solitary confinement, has provided Mr. Carrick with a unique and one-of-a-kind perspective into the U.S. criminal justice systems, prompting him to become an advocate for criminal justice and prison reform. Again, I hope that you'll join in there. Pat Nolan, you can read about that. I'll keep moving on. Brett Tolman is the former U.S. attorney, a frequent Fox TV commentator, and will be moderating the discussion. Mike Coyle says, was Bernie Carrick one of the founders of the very controversial stop and frisk policies, the New York Police Department? I gotta say, I have no idea. I wish I could answer that for him, but I don't know. Richard Curtis, Brett Tolman is excellent and very impressive. He had a powerful effect on Utah. He did, and I'm so grateful to have him on our town hall tomorrow. Mark says, what pushback will you have from the institutions that obtain funding from incarcerations? Many jobs will be lost if we can empty out our prisons, which I think is a good objective for nonviolent criminals. The court system, in my view, is a business, is more of a business than that of justice. What happens when you take away money from the equation of parties who have to pay when they're incarcerated? The bottom line is, what do you do with all the people who rely on this for their incomes? Well, the reality is that occurs. Prosecutors get wages, defense attorneys get paid, drug support people get, it all flows through, which is one of the real challenges in changing the criminal justice system, because at some level, whether it's at a surface level or at a deeper psychological level, people don't like change. And we have to understand that the purpose of the criminal justice system is not to provide a living for anyone. The purpose of the criminal justice system is to protect our community, and we need to find the best solution for that. And society and wherever the money flows will adapt. I will say that the Utah State Legislature recently overhauled Utah's bail system. It's going to change the bail bond industry immensely. The bail bond industry opposed it tremendously. Everyone else in the system applauded it, and it will hugely affect that system. But as we move forward, trying to change our system, people will have to shift and adjust, because the purpose of the system isn't to employ people. All right. I agree. I would love to see the three of you together. Me too. We missed it by that much, Marcia, in the words of Maxwell Smart from Get Smart. It'd be an interesting discussion. It would have been a much more interesting discussion with the three of us, but now it'll just be the two of us. Richard's right, and incumbent has no advantage to be part of a debate. We at least hope that he'd at least be joining the conversation. It would have been nice. What is your position on someone who does not qualify for a public defender, but has to marshal all the resources to fight against false prosecution? I spoke with John Swollow for an hour about the cost to his family and to him personally. The prosecutors walk free, John's life. I mean, the bottom line is, part of the reformation that we need to do is to simplify the process of jury trials. It can't be so expensive for an everyday citizen who has enough money to not be appointed a lawyer to have it devastate their lives. And we can do that. There are ways to do that. We just have to make the process less complicated. Mike says, if you're trying to help defendants, can you speak to the issue that many defense attorneys in Utah County are not happy with the direction you've taken in the office? I'd be happy to address that. And the reality is, I'm asking criminal defense, the public defenders, to work harder. I'm asking the public defenders to stop accepting plea deals from their clients and to start trying cases. And I can promise you that the reason why the public defenders in Utah County are not happy with the direction I'm taking in this office is because I'm asking them to work harder. I'm asking them to work 5 days a week instead of 4 days a week. I'm asking them to come, to come to court more prepared. I'm asking them to do their job, because the reality is the criminal justice system in any jurisdiction demands that there be tension on both sides of that there be a strong prosecution and a strong defense. And the reason why the Utah County Public Defender's Office are not happy with the direction I'm taking this office is because I'm asking them to do more, and they need to do more because our system's in peril. Spencer says, how do you send something from district court for a felony to justice court for misdemeanors if there's evidence to sustain felony? Isn't it sending it to justice court the same as a plea bargain? Well, the answer to your last question, Spencer, is that you know, it's not the same as a plea bargain, because a plea bargain happens after the prosecutor decides on what the charge should be. We'll be sending no felonies to justice court. The question just is, when a Class A misdemeanor is committed, 2 crimes have been committed. Number one, the first crime is an attempt to commit that crime, which is a Class B misdemeanor. The second crime is a Class A misdemeanor, which is the actual offense. Right now, they all go to district court and they clunk around the system for 5 or 6 months and get continuance after continuance from the public defender's office. And finally, that will resolve as a Class B misdemeanor, but we've wasted and clogged we've wasted 5 or 6 months of the court's time and everyone else's time. We've clogged the courts. And what this HB 300 that you're referring to simply chooses to charge a Class B misdemeanor rather than a Class A misdemeanor. And so, no, that's not a plea bargain. That's just it's a prosecutorial choice as to what to charge. Jared says, thank you for your candid information and for fighting for justice and reducing the oppression of government. I support you. Thank you. And Spencer wants if you can send us a code for the supervisory function. Spencer, are you talking about the Attorney General, county attorney thing? If you shake your head yes or no, I mean, I can see your face. Okay, yeah, we'll be happy to get that for you. What kind of assistance would you provide to prosecutors across the state? That's a great question, Mandy, and let me say it this way. It is time for us to retool in the state of Utah. There are a lot of crimes for which we prosecute. In fact, Sherry or Michael, if you'll throw the survey up onto the chat line, I'd like you to take the survey while you're here, if you haven't already taken the survey. But there's a lot of crimes that that local prosecutor's office don't have the resources to prosecute. White collar crime, embezzlement, elder abuse. I mean, you know, rather than go through a whole laundry list, I'll simply say there's a lot of crimes that for which the local prosecuting agencies don't have the experience, because they may only prosecute one of these cases once a year or once every 2 or 3 years. And so the assistance that we would provide for local prosecutors is to say, okay, these lawyers in the Attorney General's office, they do this every week of their lives. When you have a case like this, we'll come down to your office, we'll train you on it, we'll sit in the trial with you if you need us to. Basically, we're here for you. And that's the kind of assistance that I'm talking about, helping with prosecutors across the state. Bennett Cookson says, jury is far more expensive. How to avoid too many or frivolous cases? Well, you know, if we tried more cases to a jury, would have fewer cases that people thought were frivolous, because prosecutors wouldn't file them as much because they have to go answer to someone that's a check beyond themselves, and that's the jury. And while it is more expensive to have a jury trial than a plea bargain, we have to remember that the jury trial is one of the, you know, according to John Adams, the heart and the lungs of our liberty. We can't afford to lose that, because once we have the government who's making all the decisions and not the people, that's when things go really bad, and we have to be willing to support a jury system, or we simply won't have our liberty. Mark, I like that background. That's nice. Okay. Thank you for explaining your position on liberty and our own responsibility. No problem. I'm going to. Amy says, can a convicted felon vote in Utah? We've had that question. Oh, and I think that then you answer the question. And so we're running out of time. So if you'll come down to Amy Lloyd's chat line and read that, that'd be great. And then DB to everyone says that felon voting rights restored on probation, parole, or released. That is also true. And Dave Clark points out that the voter registration form includes a box that says, I am not currently a felon, currently incarcerated for commission of a felony. And Mike Coyle says it isn't just public defenders, it's private attorneys as well. Well, of course, it's especially the private attorneys, Mike, because a private attorney will say, yeah, I'll represent you for $5,000, and they can come in and in a half an hour, they can get a plea bargain and they pocket their $5,000. Or we take that $5,000 and you have to start preparing for trial, and it takes days and days and days and days. You suddenly have to earn your money. Of course, private defense attorneys don't like the direction I'm taking this. And it's interesting because, people on the outside of law enforcement, they see the need for these reforms and they get on board. People on the inside, they don't like them because it affects their life oftentimes. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. Mark Edwards, the AG has a white collar and elder abuse unit. Do you know that? Yeah, I know that, but they don't participate with county attorneys. They prosecute their own cases. And that's the distinction that I'm saying. Rather than having two levels where, that prosecute, that never talk to each other. There are times the Attorney General's office will show up to prosecute a white collar case in court, and we've never heard anything about them. But what should happen is that the local county attorney should be prosecuting that white collar and elder abuse, with the Attorney General helping and advising. Mike says, I did. I'm not sure what that is referring to. Mark asks, have you ever been to a SWAP meeting? I've been to many SWAP meetings, yes. I'm on the board of SWAP. And I know very well how it works. Okay, that appears to be all of the questions that you have asked, and I'm about 5 minutes over the hour that I try to tell myself that I won't keep you beyond. I just want to say this in closing. Our criminal justice system is in real peril. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I can see the problems, and I have the courage to attack the problems. I need to rely on lots of people around me that know lots of things that I don't know to help us find solutions. That should be the role of the Attorney General, to have the courage to take on a system that has grown so large that it governs us. Well, that simply can't be the case anymore. We have to change that. And I'll go back to where I began and give you these two statements from John Adams and from John Dickinson one more time. Representative government and trial by jury are the heart and lungs of liberty. Without them, we have no other fortification against being ridden like horses, worked like cattle, and fed and clothed like swine and hounds. John Dickinson, another founder, he from Pennsylvania, implored us, it's the duty of every man and woman to maintain to the utmost the jury trial, to restore it to its ancient dignity, if at all impaired, and above all, to guard it with the most jealous circumspection. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't afford to trade our liberty for efficiency. To do so is to barter our birthright for a hollow promise of order. And I sit in the chair as the elected prosecutor every day in Utah County. I am the person in Utah County who has the sole authority to investigate anyone who wants to investigate, charge anyone who wants to charge, prosecute or not, give a plea bargain or not, and have complete 100% complete immunity for my actions. And I am telling you, as the person that holds that power, it's too much power to vest in one person. We need to separate and diffuse power. And where do we where do we diffuse that? We diffuse that by giving it back to people. And there's no way we're going to give that power back to people unless it's the prosecutors who hold it who give it back. That's the way that has to work. And I'm running for Attorney General to persuade prosecutors around this state that that's what we need to do. I'm running for Attorney General of this state because we have a huge problem that we need to collectively work towards fixing. And I need your help. I need your support. And so I would ask that you support me for Utah Attorney General. We are just a few days away from the beginning of the votes, and we can make a real difference. Let me tell you just one brief story as I leave. 20 some odd years ago, I was the county attorney in Juab County, 23 or 4 or 5 years ago. And a man was picked up on the freeway with 2 pounds of marijuana. He came in with his lawyer. He was from Montana. He had purchased the marijuana in California. He intended to sell it at the University of Montana. And he came into my office with his lawyer, and he was 18 years old. And he said, you know, what is it that can be done here? And I thought to myself, well, you know, you can plead guilty to the felony. You can go do your time in jail. You can go up to Montana and you'll be a felon. You know, what's my part of this? You're the one that picked up the drugs. You're the one that went through Juab County, and now you're going to go to Montana. It's just that we're going to pay for it. And then I had a bit of an epiphany. I realized here's an 18-year-old kid. And I hold the keys. If he's willing to hold and give me the other key, I hold the key to the trajectory of his life. And my duty here is to protect society. What will protect society more? Branding this kid as a felon, or giving him an opportunity to pull himself out of the mire? I said to the kid, I said, listen, do you have a mother or a father with whom you're close? And he said, well, yeah, I got a dad. I said, well, that's good, because the people that get out of their scrapes the most are the ones that have some sort of family structure or friend structure to help them through it. I said, what do you want to do when you grow up? He says, I kind of like to join the Coast Guard. I said, you know, I hate to tell you this, but, you know, peddling dope from California to Montana is not going to get you in the Coast Guard. It's kind of the wrong path. And I said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I'll give you option number 1, which is go, you know, plead guilty here, go to jail here for 90 days, which was the standard at the time. Go up to Montana and be a felon and live your life. And you and I will never see each other again. Or I said, I can demonstrate that I care about how your life turns out, and you can turn around, you can plead guilty here and we won't sentence you, we'll hold it in abeyance. You can turn around, you can go back to California, you can call your dad on the way and you can say, hey dad, I got some news. I got busted in a place called Juab County, Utah for having 2 pounds of marijuana. So you have that tough phone call, and then you go and enlist in the Coast Guard, and you make sure that you give your pay stub to your dad every month, and you make sure that your dad faxes that to me every month. Back in the days of fax, that dates me a little bit. And he said, okay, I'll take that deal. And he went back and he enlisted in the Coast Guard. And for the next 27 months, I got paychecks from him, from the Coast Guard to him, from him to his dad to me. And then they changed on month 27. Because in month 27, he he got paid more money because he'd been made a sergeant in the Coast Guard. And I've often thought to myself, what would life have been different for society had a small town prosecutor not cared? What would have been like for this kid had a small town prosecutor not been invested enough in benefiting society rather than just giving someone their brand and going on their way? And that's what needs to change in the criminal justice system. We have to recognize the actual individual humanity that exists in every human being that flows through our system. Most of them may not take us up on those kinds of efforts. And that's the point, is that we have to be willing to be hurt and have our hearts broken and have our hearts stepped on in the name of trying to help someone else. But that's how we can change our criminal justice system, and we'll change people along the way. I've seen it over 30 years of practicing law. I've seen lots of failures, but I've seen lots of successes. And we can save our criminal justice system along the way if we'll do that. And that's my desire as Attorney General. If you will give me your vote as Attorney General, I would love to implement across this state what we're attempting to implement in Utah County. I need your support. I need your vote. The end is coming up. Voting starts on Thursday. I hope you'll join us tomorrow night for a conversation with the Attorney General candidates who will show up, or Wednesday night. I hope you'll join me tomorrow night for Bernie Carrick, the New York Police Commissioner that President Trump pardoned. If you can help us, please email me at david@davidleavitt.com. We need you to make phone calls. If you're willing to give a recorded message, we'll take you up on that. We simply need what you have, because together we can make this work. So I'm going to bid you farewell and thank you for coming. And I hope that you have a very great rest of your day. Thank you.